What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review The Exorcist Believer, Part 1 in a two-part saga. Part 2, The Exorcist Deceiver, is coming our way on April 18th, 2025. But where to begin with this giant steaming pile of like shit and vomit all stirred together into such a uniquely horrible concoction? I don't even know where to start when it comes to completely, totally ripping this movie a new asshole, because The Exorcist, for me, a movie that is sacred in spite of its subject matter, and I'm not alone, that is the 9th most popular movie ever released in America based on purely on ticket sales. And it's a full-blown horror phenomenon. I feel like irrespective of the genre, it is one of the best movies ever made by an American filmmaker, and it helps that it was based on one of the scariest goddamn novels ever written. And if you want to hear me speak at length about all the good things from The Exorcist, as well as The Exorcist 3, and even Repossessed, the comedy spoof, check out my live stream, which I did with Martin Kessler a few weeks ago, where we went on for like an hour and a half about all the amazing things about The Exorcist. But I feel like it is an undisputed masterpiece of cinema. So, of course, David Gordon Green, complete and total hack that he is, had to team up with Jason Blum to shit all over it. And I guess the only good news from this whole debacle is that John Boorman is no longer the director of the worst movie with The Exorcist in the title. Exorcist 2, The Heretic, is pretty lousy. I know it's got its defenders, it's got its admirers. I do not count myself amongst that elite group of fans, but I love John Boorman. I mean, I love Point Blank, and I love Deliverance, and I love Excalibur, and it always kind of wounded me that he made such a horrible sequel to The Exorcist. But The Exorcist Believer is so goddamn bad that it's going to make people look back at Exorcist 2, The Heretic like a goddamn cinematic masterwork. I mean, it is a disgracefully stupid movie on so many levels, and I wonder, when a movie's as bad as this, and as many people are planning on skipping it as they are, is it even worth it trying to, say, I'm not going to talk about spoilers. Maybe I'll try to avoid them initially, but I think as I talk about the movie and I get increasingly angry, I have a feeling some spoilers are going to come around. So let's start with the basics from Wikipedia. The Exorcist Believer is a 2023 American supernatural horror film directed by David Gordon Green and written by Green and Peter Sattler from a story by Scott Teems, Danny McBride, and Green. The 6th installment in the Exorcist franchise, it serves as a direct sequel to the original 1973 film. The film stars Leslie Odom Jr., Ann Dowd, Jennifer Nettles, Norbert Leo Butz, Lydia Jewett, and Olivia Markham in her film debut, along with Ellen Burstyn reprising her role from the original film as Chris McNeil. Jason Blum produces through his Blumhouse Productions banner alongside David C. and James G. Robinson through their Morgan Creek Entertainment banner. Universal collaborated with Peacock to acquire distribution rights in June 2021 for $400 million with the intention of launching a new trilogy of films. Principal photography took place between November 2022 and March 2023. And then I love how it includes, the film received generally negative reviews from critics. Yeah, no shit. I think this film has established a new low for David Gordon Green, and he's the same piece of shit who directed Halloween Kills, one of the dumbest movies ever created by a human being. So why am I getting so irritated, or why am I getting so passionate and resorting to name-calling? I guess because David Gordon Green at one time was a very promising young filmmaker with a ton of potential and a ton of really cool early successes. And then slowly but surely, he's just decided, almost like he's deliberately chosen to sabotage not only his own career by making willfully stupid movies, but he's doing so at the expense of some of the all-time great franchises. And Halloween, if you're a horror fan, is sacred. The Exorcist, if you're a horror fan, it's sacred. And when you piss on something that's sacred or use it to your own ends, well, then naturally people are going to get mad. And I guess I should just come out right and say it. I think at this time in American movies, there is no filmmaker out there who's currently making a living directing movies that I regard as a worse filmmaker than David Gordon Green. Obviously, there are worse directors out there. If I were to direct The Exorcist Believer, it would be even worse because I'm not a filmmaker. I'm not a director. I like talking about movies. I like watching movies. But it takes a rare gift to direct a good movie. But of all the people out there who are active and employed and with movies scheduled to be released in the future, I think David Gordon Green right now is the heavyweight champion when it comes to making the dumbest fucking movies in all of entertainment. And in that this is a religiously themed movie, I almost feel like Christ himself sacrificing himself on the cross on behalf of all the world's sinners so that they do not waste their money by going to see this steaming pile of doggy doo-doo, because Yeah, I hope this movie, like, it's very rare that I actively root against a movie and like want to see it burn down in flames. I hope this movie loses every single dollar that was invested in it. The budget was $30 million, but like I said, the rights cost $400. I don't know how much money this is going to have to make and the sequel's going to have to make before this franchise might be in the black. And obviously Jason Blum at this point, extremely successful producer. He knows what he's doing when it comes to, exciting the interest of the audience and getting people to show up. I think the first Halloween movie made over 100. But holy crap, I'm rooting hard against this. And if it crashes and burns, I will tap dance on their fucking grave, because for like the first 20 or 30 minutes, I was like, oh, it's just going to be kind of bland and it's going to be kind of boring and like, no harm, no foul. Like, go ahead. There are plenty of bland, boring horror movies out there. Not every horror movie gets to be as good as The Exorcist or as popular as The Exorcist. But at a certain point, once Ellen Burstyn showed up, and Ellen Burstyn I regard as Hollywood royalty. I mean, she was in The Last Picture Show. She was in The fucking Exorcist. She was in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. If you love early 70s movies, and I do, and you love all those filmmakers like Friedkin and Bogdanovich and Coppola and Scorsese and all those legends that were active at the time, well, Ellen Burstyn was one of the stars that helped make their movies possible, and she is acting royalty as far as I'm concerned. And because she has taste and integrity, throughout most of her career, she's been turning down offers to appear in Exorcist sequels because she knew they would be horrendous. But apparently on this one, I saw this interview online where she admitted that she thought of the most ridiculous sum of money she could possibly think of that might actually be realistic to come back to the franchise. And then she basically doubled that number and said, look, if you will pay all this money, not for me, but to create a scholarship at a school of my choice, then I'll consider coming back. And they said, all right, like, done. And so somebody out there are a few lucky kids out there that are going to get a great education as a result of Ellen Burstyn agreeing to come back for this film. But oh my God, I felt like wounded on her behalf in all of her scenes. Without explaining, well, I guess I got to explain to a degree. There's a scene where she comes face to face with one of the two girls that's possessed in this, and she tries to do a routine that it was like a mix of Gandalf intimidating Bilbo to get him to give up the ring voluntarily, as well as Max von Sydow in The Exorcist, where she was trying to channel that kind of majestic power to confront the devil. And it was so unintentionally humorous and so just unimaginably stupid. I had to almost kind of like cover my lips to like suppress a laugh, because the big, scary, dramatic moment and how it ends is so unimaginably dumb and so out of left field. I was like, what? I was like, first and foremost, y'all paid how much money for her to appear in this movie for like this short a time, and you're going to wrap up her big confrontation with that? I mean, it was like one of the greatest like missed opportunities creatively that you could possibly conceive of the human imagination. And I suspected in advance that this movie might be a giant stinker based on the trailer and also based on David Gordon Green's past work. Like I said, Halloween Kills is unwatchable. But as I was watching the trailer and I heard weird, like awkward line readings, like when the girl's like, I don't want to go to hell. I was like, ooh, like this might be real fucking dumb. But then as the movie started to unfold and I started listening to the dialogue, I was like, wow, like y'all are really exploring the bottom. Like there's this scene, I'll go ahead and fucking spoil it because I don't fucking care. But there's a scene where the father of one of the two possessed girls is talking to Chris, a.k.a. Ellen Burstyn, and she's admitting that in the exorcism of Reagan, her daughter, that she wasn't actually in the room when the exorcism took place. And he says, oh, well, how come you weren't in the room? And she says, oh, like the patriarchy. I was like, oh my fucking God. Like, I had to suppress the urge to projectile vomit just like Reagan back in The Exorcist. The idea of accusing the original film, The Exorcist, and the characters therein of somehow being part of the patriarchy. I mean, first and foremost, you're basically hawking a loogie on one of the best-selling and best-loved horror novels ever written, and one of the best-selling and one of the most loved horror movies ever made. To accuse that as being somehow the instrument of an evil, corrupt patriarchy, I mean, once again, I wanted to projectile vomit in the face of all the filmmakers and writers associated with this movie. But it's one of those movies that makes you feel like you're getting dumber with each second as you watch it, because it doesn't even know what its own stance is on the religious aspects of the story. Obviously, if you're making a movie about like exorcism called The Exorcist, at a certain point, you're gonna have to take a stand on like how do you want to portray religion? And I feel like The Exorcist was one of the best movies ever made when it came to portraying people of faith in a heroic light. And I am not a person of faith, but I grew up an Episcopalian. But I don't spit on religion. I just don't practice religion. But in the original Exorcist, the way Damien is portrayed, like boxing at the gym and drinking whiskey and chain smoking, and he's so grounded and so intelligent and so well educated and has so much integrity. I think it's, like I said, it's the most heroic portrayal of religion that I can think of in any movie that I've ever seen. But this movie tries and fails to have it two ways, because it wants religion to be at the core of the movie. It wants to show like people who believe in God, exorcising the demon, etc., and so forth. And there are a lot of people in the room at the end. There's like 5 or 6. It's like, oh my God, like please, can we just like settle on 1 or 2 of you to be the speakers on behalf of the Lord and Jesus, etc., and so forth. Anyway, that's not the route they went. They decided to make it a team effort, and it makes the movie much worse as a result. But obviously, if you are going to be invested in the climax of the movie, at a certain point, you have to believe in what you're seeing. You have to believe in these people of faith having the power to like call down God, to drive out the demons or drive out the devil out of these 2 little girls. And yet, in like the first third of the movie, it portrays several of these characters as the most ignorant, most hateful, just idiotic people imaginable, where every line of dialogue coming out of their mouth, like, all right, I get it. Like the movie lays it on real thick and in a real obvious fashion that it regards people of faith, especially from kind of small southern communities, as fools, like to be mocked, and that they are like to be openly derided and looked down upon and spat upon in the context of the story. And yet we're also still supposed to be invested in those characters as like the instrument of religion and God, etc., as they're going to war with the demons at the end. It's like, all right, well, you don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to make fun of them and celebrate them at the same time. It makes the movie feel like they have no idea what they're doing, and they didn't know what they were doing. This movie is completely, totally amateur and incompetent and just piss poor in execution across the board. And I am no snob when it comes to the horror genre. I've been watching horror movies for decades at this point, and I've seen many a silly horror movie that, you can usually find like a performance or a special effect or a scene or even a poster where you're like, all right, at least they gave us that. Like they've redeemed themselves to some extent. I have no problem whatsoever watching terrible horror movies, but you got to give us something. But this movie is about as scary and as interesting as like a rotten egg. Like a rotten egg, it's not very threatening, but it smells bad, and if you open it up, like woof, like it's a pretty grotesque experience all around. And so yeah, this movie is just a fucking stinking rotten egg. And so I guess all we've proven with this movie is that the writers are not the equal of William Peter Blatty, and David Gordon Green sure as shit not the equal of director William Friedkin. R.I.P. William Friedkin. Of all the directors who emerged in the 1970s, I mean, he had been directing since the early 60s. He even saved a man's life with a documentary in like the mid 60s. But of all the American directors to really kind of put their stamp on that decade in the 70s, William Friedkin was one of the best, and his personality was so combative and so adversarial, and he's just so fucking entertaining. He's one of those great raconteurs that could tell stories for hours and keep you fascinated, which reminds me, everybody needs to hunt down the video where he describes an experience about the first public screening of Exorcist II, The Heretic. It's absolutely hysterical, and I'll give you a taste of it right here.
The executives go into the last row. 10 minutes into the picture, a guy stood up in the audience. He stood up and he looked around, and he said, "The people who made this piece of shit are in this room!" And somebody else said, Where are they?
And I'll leave a link in the description below where you can watch that story. But yeah, I recommend everybody just watch as many of William Friedkin's movies as humanly possible. I mean, The French Connection, an absolute masterpiece. Cruising is totally fucking outrageous. Sorcerer is one of those movies like Apocalypse Now or like Agira, The Wrath of God, where like the crew had to go through such hell in making it. You're almost like required to watch it just to see how once upon a time, if you thought of something unimaginably horrific in your mind that you wanted to have like projected on the big screen, the only way to see it was to do it. Like you couldn't just have a bunch of nerds on their computers like created artificially. You had to go into the jungle and go through hell, which is precisely what William Friedkin did making Sorcerer. Strongly recommend people hunt that movie down. It is truly from a bygone era in terms of they do not make movies like that anymore. And it's incredible how everything that William Friedkin did right with The Exorcist, David Gordon Green gets wrong with this movie. Like there's not a single moment where I was like, wow, like that was a cool special effect. Oh, that was a really creepy, interesting beat. Like he overuses all the subliminal imagery. He overuses the things like, like the bad smells that the actors are reacting to. He overuses the kind of almost like what I would describe as like religious hysteria in this movie, as you have like 6 or 7 different people all screaming at once, trying to drive out the demon. And it's just The climax of this movie is just so fucking unwatchable. It is absolutely the nadir, like the low point of this movie. And it's a movie that already had kind of driven me out of the room by the time it got to that point. And so often I just found myself wanting to scream at the screen, like, where is your courage? Like, here we are 50 years after the first movie, and we've taken so many steps back creatively. Like, where is the river of profanity that we heard Reagan scream back in the original film, like, your mother sucks cocks in hell, I mean, all that crazy shit. Or where are the truly unspeakable acts performed at the crucifix? I mean, once again, the movie is 50 years old, and yet I feel like cinema right now is just so cautious and so risk averse and so boring, and I'm fucking sick of it. And just to continue along these religious themes when it comes to describing this movie and my reaction to the filmmakers involved, if there is a hell, and who knows if there's a hell or not, I don't necessarily believe in hell or demons or devils, but if there is one, I hope David Gordon Green goes there and burns in the most painful way humanly possible for what he's done to both the Halloween franchise and The Exorcist. It's like, you're a filmmaker, you're successful, you've got the, I guess, the commercial clout and the freedom to probably invent a story from scratch. But no, you've got to take these incredible franchises from the past and wreck them and ruin their name and make them an object of ridicule. It's like, make up your own ideas, fuckface. Like, if you're a successful filmmaker and you've got like a 20-year filmography, you know, some movies are like, he's got some hits and he's got some misses, but he's got enough hits where if he wanted to launch his own franchise from scratch with Jason Blum, he could, but because he's completely, totally devoid of any original ideas of his own and is completely creatively bankrupt, no, he has to not only make one shitty Exorcist movie, he has to make two. And I guess the only unfortunate casualty out of all this is that the actors probably signed on hoping that they would be part of a really cool horror experience. And I doubt any of these actors wanted to create an experience that would like send the cast or send the crowd out of the theater, you know, like wanting to claw their eyes out and rip their ears off, just trying to like scrape their tongue, like get rid of the experience of digesting The Exorcist Believer. But I don't know. Hopefully, it will lead to them getting other opportunities, and they can move them. And one day they can look back. And, oh my God! Remember that time where I did The Exorcist Believer? Like, thank God I bounced back with this TV show, or thank God I bounced back with something else. I hope they'll never make the sequel. I hope at this point it's going to be such a completely like biblical level disaster in terms of critical ridicule, audience ridicule. I mean, at this point, if you make a bad show or a bad movie, the YouTube community is pretty good at laying you low and ridiculing you to their last breath. I hope people just go out guns blazing and just eat this movie alive because it has earned it. And I've been criticized in the past about doing way too many positive reviews on this channel and that I like every movie and I never say a bad thing. Well, this is a video that will make up for all the previous oversights on my part, because in general, with shows and movies that I fucking hate, I just avoid discussing them. Like, life's too short. I don't watch shows that suck. Well, at least I try not to watch shows that suck, and I definitely try not to waste too much time and energy paying money to see movies that suck. But every once in a while, I get suckered in, like Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. They suckered me in because I love Tolkien. Like, Tolkien is sacred, and any great stories in film or in literature or whatever, I regard them as like really special, magical experiences. And when people fuck them up, that's when I get a little irritated and pissed off. So I think at this point, I'm starting to repeat myself. I'm going to let this go. I hope I've helped a few people out there dodge a bullet. But if you want to watch it and tell me that I'm wrong, like, by all means, or if you want to watch it and add your voice to the choir of criticism, by all means, give it your best shot. They've earned it. But at this point, I'm going to, I guess it's time to sign off before I just start speaking in tongues like some possessed character in one of these movies. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it on some level. If so, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. Hope everybody has a great weekend, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.